Hey, welcome in on a Tuesday afternoon here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by. This is the College Football Show. Great to see all of you. I will see here in just a second who I'm actually looking at when I say good to see all of you. But of course, it's good to see all of you, so I can say that before I even look. So the call-in lines there in the chat, if you would like to talk college football with me. First and foremost, we're going to look at the ACC. The ACC. I like how I said that. The ACC. A lot of ACC talk in here. The Disputed National Champions is the book. Historical reset of the 1990s. Looking forward to the future, though, not just a history book. So thank you for being here. Amazon links in the description section of all the videos. So when you shop on Amazon, I'm not saying shop on Amazon, but I'm saying when you shop on Amazon, please use the link that we provide there in the description section. And again, we'll take your calls Monday through Friday. We're here at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Some folks have commented to me, hey, Mark, you used to be on in the evening, at night, late at night, all of those things. Yes, I did. And yes, we had more people watching and all that sort of thing. Maybe I'll take some polls to see at what point people would like to. Do you want like an evening show, like a late night show, like a really late night show? We could do that once a week. We shall see. But we do appreciate you stopping by for this one. The Juice Diet is, man, I should give them, they should sponsor us after that. But yeah, the Juice Diet is going splendidly. Although I will say, since I'm halfway through it, that I am contemplating what kind of pizza I'm going to order as soon as it's over. All right, to the chat. Who do we got? Dave's here, which always makes it awkward for me to tell everyone that Dave's here. Dave's here. Good to see everyone there. Karen, happy Tuesday. I'm guessing that Karen, for some reason on this particular day, would have an opinion on what shirt I should be wearing. Tukey G, happy Tuesday. And Tukey, thank you so much for being here, supporting as you typically do. Julian, I knew the second both Oklahoma and Texas left the Big 12. It was a matter of time before Florida State left the ACC. Okay, all right. We'll get to that matter. Dave's here. ACC got rolled by Clemson and Florida State, but leaked early to make it look like they won. All right. Let's get to that little matter right here and now. Darrell with rest in peace to the ACC. Yes. When you look at that's what we're getting to here. What we're getting to is on the surface, we've got a situation basically where the ACC is held intact, but the conditions don't leave for a great just kind of establishment of keeping the league together. But we'll go through it. Well, Florida State did the heavy lifting of forcing the hand of the ACC and going forward with battling the ACC and saying we demand more and we want more and we're either going to get it or we're leaving, and then Clemson jumped in. Darrell MVP's calling, so we'll hear from him first. Darrell, what's going on?
Well, Mark, there's just some days in college sports where the table gets set and the landscape changes forever. And today is one of those days, in my opinion, where we look back in 5-10 years and we look back at landmark moments and say, well, this is when the sport changed forever. And today's one of those days.
Yeah, so we are obviously going to proceed through this article, and there sure are going to be many versions of the rundown from today's settlement. I can't say that I read it top to bottom. I breezed through it, and a few things struck me as setting it up for easy exit out of the ACC. So that comes to mind. So until I really delve through it line by line. I can't really address your particulars, but certainly you are welcome to do so.
Well, based on what I've seen, again, I haven't dived through and combed through every little nook and cranny of the details, but it seems like the exit fee as of right now is $165 million.
Yes.
And then it's going to slowly dwindle down until 2029, 2030 into $75 million.
Yes. That's
And
what I'm
then, I
hitting
mean,
on. Yep.
right.
Keep going.
If we had an Earth Cam in Tallahassee, Florida, how quickly do you think they're packing their bags? Do you think they're already packing it right now? Because I would be packing my bags if I was the FSU administrators.
Well, packing your bags for where?
Somewhere else other than the ACC. Probably the Big Ten, if I had to take a guess. Maybe the SEC. I mean, I don't see how the ACC is going to hold up now. They're just a house of cards just waiting to completely collapse unless they get Notre Dame, in my opinion. They just don't have, they're in an awkward position because they're strong enough to where they wanted conferences above them are willing to pick them off, but they're not so bad like the Big 12 where they're just undesirable.
Yes. So that's always been the issue from the time this started to unravel, is that from top to bottom, the ACC has few bragging rights over the Big 12, but they've got the state of Florida and they've got Clemson. So basically they have what can be premier programs, what have been premier programs, and therefore they're subject to getting those plucked away and picked off, and the rest of the league imploding as opposed to the Big 12, which is just decent, just okay. And therefore nobody wants anyone from the Big 12. Therefore you can play marginal football and make money and be a somewhat viable conference. And that's may turn out, and it appears to be, and we've been talking about this for years now, appears to be a more favorable position than to have a league that's full of a lot of Boston College and Wake Forest that nobody wants, but have 3 or 4 programs that people do want, and them earning the great majority of the income. And so if they're gone, you don't have a league. However, the only thing I will say is I don't know the intent of the Big Ten and the SEC other than this this overarching thought that they just want to take over the whole sport. And so maybe they do want to continue to expand. You know, it's appeared at times that they did, and then they've kind of pulled back and held steady for a time being. Now, of course, they know a lot more than we do. And guys like Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti knowing, okay, when they've said, okay, we're good for now, we're fine. And they've even said beyond good for now, they've made it sound like this is where we're stopping. This is where we want our league. They know what's going on with the ACC negotiations and where that's headed and where that could head. And knowing, okay, the time is not right today, but in 4 or 5 years, it would be easy to grab a number of schools from the ACC. And so that's when we're going to get there.
Right. In my opinion, the reason I'm so confident now that Florida State and Clemson are going to move is because 4 to 5 years, Mark, is a long time in life. I think the Florida State in particular can mend relationships with the other parties involved because to get over it. There's a way, if they play their cards right, to heal the wounds and scars, and just go to them and be open, direct, and honest about the situation that they were in. Because I just think them doing it all too suddenly, all too quickly, is a big reason the Big Ten and SEC didn't want to have them immediately, because there was some fear, I would imagine, from them. If this is the way you're treating this partner, how are you going to treat us going forward? But if you have 4 to 5 years, you can establish a clear vision going forward.
Well, I'll add to that even though you and I have talked several times about how Florida State has been perceived apparently by the Big Ten, and I'll be a little stronger than apparently, because while we don't know the sources, we can trust that there were legitimate sources that were tied to negative and derogatory comments coming from the Big Ten about Florida State. But even though those relationships may not be the best, there's something that overrides that eventually. And you point to one thing that from a relationship standpoint, from a negotiation standpoint, time does heal some things and you can backpedal and you can make amends. But from the simple fact of, number one, Florida State treating the ACC a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to treat the Big Ten the same way, because they would have more respect for the Big Ten and know that they are not the top dog in the Big Ten. They are just another school, just another program, certainly on the upper end, but not at the top of the heap in the Big Ten. Therefore, they're not in a situation where, oh, we should be treated better than everyone else. We run this league. We bring in the most revenue in this league. So we all, and we'll take it to the organization level, act differently in different circumstances depending on the power structure, based on what you can get away with versus, just being just one of the members. And then the other would be that I do believe that if this continues to take its next steps of it being a war between the SEC and the Big Ten for territory and for money and for recruiting and players eventually, then the state of Florida, I've been saying this for years, if I was the Big Ten, I would be in the state of Florida. And I would go there and I would take Florida State and Miami if I were the Big Ten.
Right. You need at least some, because the recruiting paradigm is shifting throughout the country. It's moving south and east. And currently there's only one major conference in the entire sport that has the premier recruiting places. And that's why I don't believe it's a coincidence. You look at where all the players are going, it's to one particular conference. They want to stay at home. That's a large factor in it. People like being at home, familiar environments, and they're going to Texas, Alabama, Georgia, all their familiar schools. And, it's unfortunate they're in one place. But I want to ask you also on this, how delicate do you think the ACC is? Because in my opinion, even if they just happen to lose one or two schools, like, let's say they just somehow lost Florida State or just lost like Florida State and Clemson. I think the whole thing, even if everyone else stayed the same, the conference is effectively over. Do you think the ACC is fragile as I think it is, or do you think they can survive losing one or two schools?
So this is the curious part of all this. We know that about a third to a half of the ACC wants to hang on for dear life. Wake Forest has no other
Boston
option,
College, Wake Forest, Syracuse, Pitt.
Absolutely. Then there's the obvious, elite schools at the top, or can be elite schools at the top, whether that be because of football, brand, or basketball, or a combination, and the academics of North Carolina, Virginia, that sort of thing. I'll not put Virginia in that tier, but I did mention them. So there are some schools in the middle that I'm curious about, because I don't know what
State.
Yeah, NC State. They're a good example. Who wants NC State? Do I think, I've seen some things where there has been a tie between NC State and going wherever North Carolina would go as a pair. Whether that pair becomes North Carolina and Duke, there are obvious arguments there. That pair becomes North Carolina and Virginia, or does that, because they have certain ties and connections, or does that pair become North Carolina and NC State? But NC State by themselves doesn't bring enough cachet. They'd be an attractive get for the Big 12. They would fit in terms of football brand, popularity, and playing success on the field. NC State's a perfect fit to be in that upper tier of the Big 12, where there's about 18 teams that could win the conference.
Mark, you know the old saying, beggars can't be choosers?
Yes.
That applies exactly to where I believe the Big 12 is at currently.
That they would just want to scarf up. Well, these land grabs that they've taken with Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, Colorado, etc., make me believe that, the geography of all this has obviously been blown to smithereens, so it even can't even be considered. It doesn't even matter who belongs where. And so, Yeah, I would
There's
think under that cut of who does the SEC and the Big Ten want, which I believe would be Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina for sure. And then there might be a couple attractive schools that have strengths and weaknesses, pros and cons. Georgia Tech might be one of those. But then there's this NC State Louisville tier that, the Big 12 would love to have, I would think.
Yeah, I would include SMU, Boston College,
Well,
Pitt.
SMU is a great one. Yeah, I kind of forget about that SMU even exists. But yeah, to be in the Big 12, yes.
Right. To me, I want to ask you now about the overall health and integrity of the sport, because it feels like if the ACC falls, we're going to a bilateral system of where there's only two conferences that actually matter going forward that can win a national championship.
Yeah.
I don't think that's healthy for the sport overall. I think it just basically confirms we're already an NFL junior, and it just further establishes that. Because if you're a fan of the Big 12, and there are some diehard fans, and there's a bunch of little programs, and it's a death by 1,000 cuts, I think, is what's happening to college football. What do you think about that assessment?
Well, I think that we're morphing into something that's already occurred to a certain extent. It's just going to become even more top heavy, where the Big 12 is going to be created by the SEC and the Big 10 as a group of 5 conference, and whatever they decide to give them on the national scene and in the playoff is going to be what they're going to have to take. And then the group of 5 will be given the bare minimum. And that's where we're going. Now, how Big 12 fans will respond to that, I don't mean emotionally respond. They will hate that. They will cry and whine and all those things. And I'm not saying
They
that
still believe they can win a national championship, which
and
in
I'm not
my
even
opinion
saying
is
that in a
delusional.
derogatory way. I'm saying that in a way that says this isn't fair and we should be treated with more respect and we're worth more than this. But how are they going to respond with their money and with their eyeballs during the season in regards to outside of the Big 12? Are some of them going to be turned off to their own conference, understanding the situation and knowing that we're not really viable anymore? And we haven't been viable for a while, but at least we could trick ourselves into thinking that and watching games like Arizona State and Texas in the playoff. And it's the powers that be are treating it like a business, but very much in the interim with dollars in mind temporarily. And I don't mean temporarily like just today, but I mean in the next, they're thinking 10 years from now. They're thinking that scope and not thinking long term viability of the game and how this could be diminished.
Right. And in my opinion, like the Big 12 as of right now can't win a national championship. I don't believe they're ever going to win a national championship. But
I
do you
agree.
think it should be like codified into the rules to where the SEC and Big 10 get just an outright majority of playoff spots? Because if Florida State, Clemson, Miami, and we'll throw in Notre Dame since they're kind of the X factor, all join the SEC/Big 10, I don't see how it can be even argued the Big 12 / the rest of the ACC should even get spots in the playoff going forward. Because there's going to be years where you're going to have 7-5 teams, maybe even 6-6 teams that I think are just unequivocally better than the best team in the Big 12 and the rest of the ACC going forward.
Well, currently we're giving a spot to the group of 5. So I think we're a long ways away from the SEC and the Big 10 pushing out the Big 12. I think that they want a connection to the Big 12. They may be more arrogant than what I'm giving them credit for. But I think they actually want to keep the Big 12 involved because that's still a lot of football brands that have tradition and history and still draw crowds today. And why cut all of that off? Why not allow them a connection to the playoff, an entry into the playoff, maybe 2, and keep them at bay in that place? Keep them where they belong.
Right. Well, do you watch any soccer?
I don't.
Okay. The best place I think for the sport going forward is what the Premier League has in soccer. You got your top table, and then like table 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then what happens is based on if you finish first, second, or third, you get promoted. And if you finish in the table above 17th or 18th, 19th, and 20th, you get demoted. I think that would be the best place for the sport going forward in a way to keep the Big 12 and stuff engaged, because I don't think that'd be more fun to watch than watching the Big 12 team and the rest of the ACC just get hammered over and over again by Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia going forward.
I've heard this proposed by different people. I don't like it on the surface. Have I delved into it to a degree? Yes, to a degree. I understand the concept, but I don't like it because rivalries are important. That would play with rivalries. If Rutgers is going to get demoted because they had 3-3-9 seasons in a row to some minor league, I just I don't like the instability of the sport. If that's going to be the case, I don't like the sketchiness of it. Who's going to make, are we just going to make these evaluations based on record, and then schedule comes into play and the evaluation of the schedule and how difficult it was for everyone? Are we going to take into consideration how many people show up at these games? If Ohio
No,
State
you
would
would do
go
it
into a
solely based on.
tailspin, this is a ridiculous uh, example, but shoot, we just saw Florida State go 2-10. If Ohio State goes into a tailspin, or Florida State goes into a tailspin, let me not even go to that degree. If their next two seasons are 4-8, 4-8, do they get demoted, even though people still like watching them on TV and they've got a great history and they still have recruiting ties to Florida and all the things that they bring to the table, but they just hit a funk and a bad coach and a bad situation? We're going to demote them?
Yeah, I wouldn't even do it by 3 seasons. The way I would do it the way soccer does. In every season, you just have the bottom 3 teams get demoted, the top 3 teams promoted. And it's like, oh, this team that everybody likes is in this lesser conference. Isn't that a crazy situation? So the conferences basically are nothing more than just a name brand at that point. There's not going to be any regionality, any rivalries, any tradition or history.
The
It'll
real.
just, well,
You
this is,
want
hey,
that? You
no, I
want
don't.
the SEC to
Everybody,
mean nothing. The name SEC to mean absolutely nothing.
I'm not saying I want this. I'm saying this is where I see it heading forward based on where it's going right now. This is where I see it going. I didn't want this. This is why I was fighting so hard for not expanding the college football playoff, because I could see if when you make the sport, the only thing that matters is the national championship. Well, there's about 90 to 95% of teams that I don't believe can win the national championship if they put 100% of that effort into it. I don't think like Utah. They're great. I don't think Utah will ever win the national championship. I
The
don't.
real. Hopefully, you clear up here in the next couple seconds, or we'll have to let you go. We haven't heard anything for about 15 seconds.
I was going to say I'm just evaluating the direction of the sport where I think it is currently going. It's not what I want to happen. My point is, I just think this is what happened when you expanded the playoffs. Is everything focused on? Yeah, sorry, it would seem like you were going to cut me off, but
No, I shouldn't cut you off. And I was about to cut you off, but I shouldn't do that. What I was about to say was, I guess I'm not understanding. Are you basically saying you don't want this, but since the sport has gotten to this point, you then think these steps should be taken? Or are you simply saying you believe that they will be taken?
they will be taken.
Okay.
This is the direction I believe the sport is going. It's not where I want it to go. In my direction, we go to a +1 model. That's where I believe the best health of the sport is. Every conference is staying where they're at now. There's no more conference realignment crap. You have a +1 model, so everybody feels included, but there's only really still a handful of teams that can win it. But these Big 12 fans and ACC fans and G5 fans can dilute themselves into thinking they can win a national championship when in reality they can't. And
Well, I would say for the ACC, to finish that portion of the conversation, that we have a number of schools that don't have options. They want to hang on to the ACC, and maybe this will turn the ACC into the next American conference if the top 4 schools are gone, and then the next 2, let's say, and I'm thinking Clemson, Miami, Florida State, North Carolina, they're gone. They're to the SEC or the Big Ten. And let's say an NC State, a Louisville, that range of schools, they go to the Big 12. The Big 12 wants no more. Maybe Georgia Tech, I would think that they would make a cut between one of those 2 scenarios. Anyway, we're starting with 17. SMU, you mentioned, if it's still at least an 8-team league, maybe a 10-team league, then it becomes another American conference, or it's a better version of an American conference now without Cincinnati and Houston and UCF. And they're treated like a group of 5 conference, and that's who they are. And they're still a power conference probably in basketball with Wake Forest and Duke and whomever else. But that's how I could see the ACC surviving. And the Boston Colleges of the world are still going to, their revenue is going to be diminished. It's going to be obliterated, but it's still going to be a better option than whatever else that they would determine, because they're still playing against rivals and familiar foes and basketball heavy schools like Syracuse. So there's still revenue there. There's still viability, at least in other sports. So I would think that that's how the ACC survives.
Yeah, but that's not a healthy place for the ACC or the sport to be, because if you're a Boston College fan, what goals can you have for your programs? Because you're not going to be invited to the college football playoff because you're not the best even of the G5 with those few teams you mentioned. They're just kind of like Oregon State and Washington State. They're just a driftless team going forward.
They're really driftless. They wouldn't be at that point if they had a 10-team conference. Boston College and all the other teams we could mention, they would become Memphis. They're Memphis, Tulane. That's who they are.
Yeah, but I'm speaking for a casual person. Don't you think that's driftless territory?
Well, it's driftless coming from that perspective, where at one point you at the likes of Doug Flutie playing on, the day after Thanksgiving in front of, 30 million people, and you had some relevancy. You had Matt Ryan leading top 10 teams and so forth, and you're coming from those possibilities and those realities at times, not consistently, but you're coming from those realities of actually playing Clemson on ABC on a Saturday night and those kind of games to that level, versus Tulane and Memphis living there their entire history. So doesn't seem awful to them and their fans. But yes, from a perspective that I just gave, yes, that's driftless.
Right. And my concern with the health and integrity of the sport going forward is how many driftless programs can the sport sustain? Because if FSU, Miami, Clemson, North Carolina leave, there's only going to be like 20 programs that are actually somewhat viable. Like, I don't know about one of the favorite things as one of these lower teams in the SEC is when we knock off a big boy and ruin their season. That's something for us to remember for that season. Like, I'm sure in 5-10 years, we'll be like, you remember that Kentucky team that was terrible, but somehow beat Ole Miss and ruined their season? Like, these fan bases don't even have that opportunity. It's like, oh, well, we went 9-3 and we lost to some team like New Mexico, and, it was just a completely forgettable season. Yeah. And that's just what they are going to be. They're going to have no high points ever going forward. And that's what I'm concerned about for those fan bases.
And to that point, on the flip side, looking at the haves, not the have-nots, some of those haves, the lesser portion of those haves, they may like the revenue at tax time and like the checks coming in, but does the Washington football program enjoy going 2-10? Are they going to enjoy that because their schedule is going to be Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, Alabama, et cetera, every week. I don't know. Somebody's got to lose the game. So if it
Right. And
constricts,
that's why I've been saying you are not what your record says you are. I've been saying that for years. Josh Pate's been leading the charge, but the playoff committee doesn't get it. If the playoff committee actually understood you are not what your record says you are, I feel like the sport would be also in a better shape. But I don't understand this comment from Moose. I haven't heard a single person talking about getting rid of the bottom feeders anytime soon. I just haven't seen that. I don't see them even getting rid of Kentucky because they're a founding member of the SEC. They're the premier basketball program in the entire world, not just in the Southeastern Conference or the nation, but they got literally a global fan base. They're the number one brand. So I just don't understand it.
well, when you say you're not who your record is, I don't know that that's, I was saying that when I was 15 years old. I don't think that that's any kind of revolutionary statement. But I don't know how that's been failed to be executed. For as much as I have railed on the college football playoff committee, I've railed on the committee from the standpoint of I don't want that. I don't desire that. I don't think that that's the best approach as a concept, but they have executed just fine. They made every selection exactly the way I would have. No, not every one, but basically they have defaulted to the easy selections, and they've been the selections that have made the most sense. Now, with 12 teams, their task was much different this past year. But during the 14 playoff, did they screw up a 14 playoff? No, and they really had no opportunity to. Again, could I have made a different selection here or there over the course of 10 years and 40 selections? Sure, but because of the way the leagues were constructed, especially when we had a Pac-12 and all of that, the records did pretty much line up with the teams that were most deserving or earned a playoff spot.
Well, I think this may be just a difference. I think Indiana being safely in the field is damaging for the sport going forward. I don't think it's a coincidence you're having Nebraska versus Tennessee be canceled, because I think people see the Indiana argument where they didn't even try to schedule anybody out of conference. Literally, they could have scheduled. They had a game against Louisville, canceled it because they wanted to go 6-6, and they were safely in the field. And I think that decision not to even punish them at all for their weak non-conference schedule is why these massive out-of-conference games are being taken away from us going forward. Also, a decision I disagree with this year was Clemson SMU. Clemson, in my opinion, should have been the 11th seed, and SMU should have been the 12th because they played head-to-head. But the reason, obviously, was because of record, but Clemson played two SEC teams, whereas SMU didn't. And if Clemson decided just to play Charlotte or Memphis, they would have been 11-1, have been much higher up in the standings.
True. Yeah.
So I just don't, I think there's those types of subtle decisions. I also think the conference championship games not mattering. It's another massive mistake that happened this year in the college football playoff. Ward Manuel going on TV and saying you can lose your conference championship game and it won't impact you. The dumbest mistake ever. It ruined the entire bracket process because Penn State was ranked ahead of Ohio State, despite Ohio State having clearly the better resume over Penn State. So,
yeah, it's an interesting time in which we live.
Yeah, it's uncertainty.
It is. It's a business, and it's run by business people and media people, and they just want to maximize money, revenue.
Right. My only concern about it is, are we maximizing the short term and we're forgetting about the long-term health of the sport?
Sure.
That's my concern.
Sure. That's my concern as well. And that's why I stated that a few minutes ago, that I think we're making 10-year decisions and not 100-year decisions here. And also, I'll go back to what I beat my chest about around 2020, most of all, but have been stating it ever since, is that was a clear indication to me, because we knew it before 2020, how college football was run and who has the power in college football, but it was executed most notably in 2020 during COVID, that these conferences do whatever they want. Therefore, we've gotten to two conferences that own the board, and therefore they're going to do what they want, and nobody's there to check them. That doesn't work in the NFL, of course. It's not like the AFC North and the NFC South can do whatever they want, and they have, I'm just picking two divisions, obviously, but they've got the most popular teams. They get the Dallas Cowboys and the Washington Redskins and the Philadelphia Eagles, if they're the NFC East, and they can say, well, we bring the most viewership, therefore we're going to do X, Y, and Z. No, the NFL knows that that's not good for the sport, and they act as one body, one team, one organization. That's not how the sport's run because there's no commissioner.
I completely agree with that and everything you said. And I think 2020 is a good example for when the House of Cards started to expose themselves, because the NCAA really should have taken charge and said, this is the way we're doing it. They had a perfect window of time and an excuse and a reason that would have gained them goodwill with the pandemic and said, hey, this is the way it's going to go. But instead what happened is every single conference just decided to do their own thing. And that kind of really exposed the game for, well, if the NCAA isn't going to stand up for itself now, when is the NCAA going to stand up for itself?
Yeah, if the NCAA truly ran college football, what would have happened during that time is that they would have clearly acknowledged this pandemic is not the same in every part of the country. So we can't treat all of these conferences and universities exactly the same, but we are going to put in stipulations and standards and guidelines in that is going to restrict play or clear play, and all of you are going to abide by it, and this is what it is, and you're going to take your local conditions, your regional conditions, and apply them to these standards. Now, that's what a leadership organization would have done. No, they just sat back and the SEC said, we're playing, and each conference did whatever they wanted or followed the lead of the SEC. And again, the Big Ten fascinated me the most because you saw the huge split of dichotomy between the elites and the administrators versus the football people. The football people are football people, just like the SEC, but the administrators are wanting to run and not play. And you saw that. And then the Pac-12, of course, went into a shell, and they played the least amount of football and played zero meaningful football.
Right. And I think that was the beginning of the Pac-12's downfall in general, because it's like you've got these brands, USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington, who value football, and they didn't get a chance to play that season. And if you're a recruit, all you have to say is, what if you're from a rival conference like the SEC or Big Ten, it's like, hey, we're playing football no matter what, and you're going to be on tape and you'll be in the NFL, because I'm sure there's players and stuff that would have had breakout seasons, that would have had a chance to make their name known, that unfortunately never did, because the Pac-12 just decided to pack their bags. And I think that was the beginning of the end for them. So they chose a different route. They thought they did what was best, but it clearly didn't work out for them. I don't understand this comment from Vandy Dandy. Do you TV ratings are subjective?
Well,
they're not.
Well, I put it up there because if we ever get to this article and sift through this particulars here, if I'm reading this correctly, they are subjective to a certain extent. They can be read into. And anyway, I was going to get to that. Yes, they in and of themselves are objective. The number is the number, but we can draw a lot of conclusions from those numbers based on who's playing whom. Florida State's playing Wake Forest. How many fans and viewers are coming to the table because Florida State versus Wake Forest, versus what time of day it's on versus what network versus so forth and so, like, I don't know how they're going to distribute this money when they relegate Wake Forest to the ACC network all the time. Well, of course they're not going to have the same ratings. So I don't know how that's going to be. And it even states in one of these articles that it's complex, and they even admit that's a complex issue to try to figure out, because it's you can't just take the numbers. Yes, Clemson is going to have better numbers than Boston College, and they are reflective of how many people watch Clemson football versus Boston College. So I'm not discounting that at all. but they are not truly reflective because Boston College is working at a disadvantage because their games are not played at the prime times on the best networks. And if they were, they would have better ratings.
I understand this, Mark, and this may sound cold and callous, but isn't that kind of the point of why FSU, Clemson, and Miami decided to make this deal? Is because they could just strong arm the rest of the conference to get more money? I don't think this is a fair process. I think this is them flexing their muscles on the little guys and saying, hey, we're going to get our money. I don't think they're going to do this complex math. I think they're going to just do an average of the TV ratings, say, oh, Florida State had the most, you're getting first place. Clemson, second most, you're getting second. I don't think they're going to go look into the nuances of all this. I think this is just people at the top eating from people at the bottom.
Yeah, and the people at the bottom have to take it because being in the ACC is better than the alternative.
Feels like, Mark, there could be a very deep metaphor lying somewhere in this conversation, but that's for somebody else to figure out. Anyway, I've been on here for too long. Good talking to you.
Thanks, DeReal. Appreciate you. DeReal MVP always brings insight, perspective. We appreciate his contribution. Everybody else here in the chat. Again, Dave's here and Vandy Dandy and a lot of good people here in the chat. All right. I have left the call-in line a few times. We're taking your calls right out of the gate. Again, big news with the ACC settling on the surface, settling with Florida State and Clemson. And who knows how much money was wasted. I would love to know that estimation. Nobody in the know is ever going to divulge those numbers, but people that analyze it from the outside could give us a pretty good estimation on how much money was wasted by those two universities and by the ACC. And we've got an Iowa show coming up at 5:30 Eastern right here in about 45 minutes. So we will get to that. We would love to have everyone here. Join us on the Iowa channel. They have a new offensive analyst. And based on that offensive analyst background, I think it's a good move for Iowa. Maybe Iowa's actually going to, I don't know, someday maybe throw 20 touchdowns in a season. Wouldn't that be something? So we will talk about that with one Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm. And we talk Iowa football with all of you each and every Tuesday, 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central. Our recruiting and portal show, that's a Tuesday show as well. However, this week, that has been backed up to, looking for the banner, On the Move, myself and Leanne Herring. That's recruiting and portal update live. That's going to be, it's always Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern time, except when it's not. This week, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern time. So we will see you then on the recruiting channel. Always a great show, always a great time, and always great intel and information. To this article, because there are some points that DeReal and I hit on and some others that we did not, but I'm going to be able to hit on them a little bit more specifically once I've got the verbiage in front of me. And I'm not going to read this word for word. I'm going to try to skim through it because a lot of it is obviously items that we know to a certain extent, but I don't want to assume what all of you know and have heard. We don't want to do that as well. But again, there's been ongoing litigation for months and months and months, about 14 months, ACC against Florida State and Clemson. And again, Florida State sued the ACC. Clemson sued the ACC. They got countersuits going the other way. So we're talking about 4 different lawsuits. And they came to a settlement and avoided taking it to trial. So significantly reduces exit penalty. So that's going to be key for members wanting to leave the conference before 2036. 2036 is when the famous grant of rights expires. And this information courtesy ESPN's Andrea Adelson. ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips thanked everyone, patience and dedication. Okay, says, quote, today's resolution begins the next chapter of the storied league, solidifies the ACC as a premier conference. As we look ahead to our collective long-term future, I want to express my deepest appreciation to the ACC Board of Directors, et cetera, the leadership. The league has competed at the highest level. You got to take some of these comments tongue-in-cheek. But anyway, highest level, basketball, football, a small percentage of time. For more than 70 years, and this new structure demonstrates the ACC embracing innovation, et cetera. Key phrases here: incentivizing our membership based on competition and viewership results. So we will explain. The settlements, coupled with the ACC's continued partnership with ESPN, allow us to focus on our collective future, including Florida State and Clemson. 18-member conference, 17, 18, 17, 18, 18 in all the conference or in all the sports that don't matter, and 17 because Notre Dame is not a full-fledged football member. They're not a full-fledged member. They're not a football member. Let me make that clear. They're not a football member at all. I have all sorts of people that argue that with me all the time, that try to make Notre Dame a member of the ACC. They're not a member of the ACC in any such way in football. Seattle Skier, thank you so much for the contribution. That is much appreciated. Thanks for being here. We appreciate you. Now we're hearing from Clemson AD Graham Neff. This settlement, he says, is consistent with the objectives we set out with initially, basically to say, give us more money because we're worth more. It's an excellent fit for Clemson. And the ACC is a Clemson. Yes. When you think ACC, who do you think of? Well, we always thought maybe Duke and North Carolina, first and foremost, basketball league. That's who I thought of. If you grabbed me in 1980, 1990 and said ACC, Duke, North Carolina. Now, Clemson, first and foremost. The ACC is a basketball league, but they make more money playing football, even in a basketball conference. And from an academic standpoint, this is good. This is good, guys, a good neighborhood to hang out for Clemson. To, Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia Tech, all great schools. Duke. The academic prestige, reputation we so emphasize here at Clemson is a natural fit with the other members. Historic football success. Absolutely. Great home for Clemson. It is. Let's get to the money. Both schools filed lawsuits. Yes, we know that. So they would have had to, technically, they would have had to pay as much as $700 million to leave the conference. Had there been a settlement in the other direction, meaning a settlement to leave the conference, exit the conference, there's no way that they would have had to pay $700 million, but that's technically the fee based on the agreement, because it has to do with TV rights ownership that would have been negated going forward. Okay. As a result of the settlement, the penalty to leave the conference has been significantly reduced. So, I would have loved to have heard that part of it negotiated. Because if you're Clemson or Florida State or anyone, not that Boston College wants to leave the ACC, but you might as well have the exit fee be as low as possible, regardless of who you are, not knowing what the future of collegiate athletics is. But especially if you're Clemson and Florida State, I don't know how the ACC won any part of this other than keeping Clemson and Florida State in this league for 4 or 5 years. And I don't know what the future holds. If we are here 15 years from now and Clemson and Florida State are still at the top of the ACC and the ACC still running at whatever, maybe they've got 24 teams at that point. Maybe they got Tulane and Memphis playing for them and South Florida. But I also would not be surprised if in the next 4 or 5 years, as the SEC and the Big Ten continue to flex, that Clemson and Florida State say, okay, here's your $75 million. Bye. Okay. This is where I would love to get out the calculator, but I won't. Maybe I'll do this tonight. Maybe if this is worth producing a video on, and if I could get enough accurate estimations of how this is going to shake out. So the media rights in the SEC and the Big 10 and the Big 12, you just take the total package and you bam, do the division. Everybody gets the same. There we know it. Here, we delve into some numbers that would be interesting to see how lopsided this becomes. Grant of rights remain through 2036, but beginning next year, the exit fee will be $165 million. That fee declines $18 million per year. Maybe I'm going to do a video on this. Maybe I am, because we got those numbers. So it goes to 147, then 129, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Leveling out at $75 million by 2030-31. So we're talking the beginning of the 2030, probably the summer of 2030, going into that college football season. Any team that pays the exit fee can leave with its media rights intact. So that's not a penalty that they currently, before this settlement, you leave early, you pay the set exit fee plus the media rights that are attached to your sports schedule, football, men's basketball, etc., for home games going forward. That's out the door. That's gone. Now, what is not clear here, at least to me, is are those media rights still intact until we hit that $75 million? It says any team that pays the exit fee can leave with its media rights intact at any time. So they can pay $165 million now and go? Or is this go into effect when they hit the $75 million? Then any team that pays the exit fee can leave with its media rights intact. I don't know that that's necessarily spelled out clearly unless I'm missing something there. It can be read both ways. Currently, any school that wants to leave before 2036 must pay 3 times the operating budget, a figure that would be about $120 million, plus control of that team's media rights through the conclusion of the grant of rights. Currently, yeah. Currently, yes. Okay, we're done with that. It's a well-written article otherwise, Andrea. Nice job. The timing of the exit penalty reduction is significant. Television deals for the Big 10, 2030, Big 12, the next iteration of the CFP, 2031, come up for renewal just as that fee goes down to $75 million. Uh-oh. Because, yeah, these television deals are crucial because not that schools cannot be added at other times, but it takes a lot of negotiations, because if you're in the middle of a television deal and you're the Big 10 and you want to add North Carolina and Virginia, wow, that's a lot of negotiating to figure out what are they worth? How does that change everybody else's deal? Bingo. As opposed to, oh, we're leading up to a break in 2030 in the Big 10. Here we go. The new revenue distribution model or brand initiative will be based on a 5-year rolling average. 60% of total ACC television revenue will go toward this initiative. More weight will be given to more recent viewership. A team's total viewership will then be divided by the total ACC viewership to equal its percentage of the money available. Let me back up. Whoa, that's a lot of words. Okay, the new revenue distribution model or brand initiative will be based on a 5-year rolling average. That's I know it's of the television. I don't know if that, okay, television. We're just talking television. 60% of total ACC television revenue will go toward this initiative. Okay, we talked about this the other day. So instead of, again, this is a complete, and shoot, we talked about this many times. I set this up many times. I just didn't make it 60-40. I made it 50-50. When the numbers come in from television viewership, and we know that the league makes $500 million each season. I'm just throwing out a number that's somewhere close to that. $500 million. That before, it's just divided by 17 or 16 because SMU's left on the side, and there's other nuances with Stanford and Cal being new, but you get my drift. Just divide it, that's it. Versus now saying, okay, wait a minute, let's take half of that. That gets divided equally, or I'm sorry, 40%. We take 40% of the TV revenue. That gets divided equally. Then we take the 60% and that gets divided based on your popularity on television. Okay, the other 40% of the television revenue will be distributed equally. All right. I am hesitating on this just because this is no different than what we went through the other day. I'm just contemplating doing a video and trying to do all this math and trying to find all these numbers. Florida State AD Michael Alford brought forward a similar proposal to reward teams that rate well on television to the ACC board in February 23, but there was no support for the move at the time. We started this path on what was best for not only FSU, but for the conference, and this really incentivizes everyone in our conference to have the opportunity to go out and choose a path. Clemson began pushing for changes to the distribution model after 6 straight CFP appearances, believing teams should be rewarded for athletic success. So that's going to be the other portion of this, giving more money to teams that do well in football, men's and women's basketball. With the success initiatives and brand initiative now in place, Neff told his board that Clemson will have an opportunity to earn an additional $120 million over 6 years. That number does not include potential CFP money. Every ACC team that makes the playoff earns $4 million for a first round, $8 million for a second round, $14 million for a semifinal appearance, $20 million to make the national championship game. Meaning Clemson made $4 million this year and SMU made $4 million. We went through this the other day versus the SEC. Okay, back up. Clemson and SMU made $8 million this year for the conference in the CFP. Arizona State made $8 million because they made it 2 rounds technically for the Big 12. The SEC was at like $24 million and the Big 10 at like $40 million for the rounds in which they made it. Clemson has had the highest viewership of the ACC over the past 6 years, while Florida State consistently ranks in the top 4. Those are not the only 2 schools that stand to earn more money. Georgia Tech, ACC viewership, thanks to, in part to a week 0 game against Florida State, a 7 overtime thriller against Georgia. That could help out those schools that play those marquee games where, again, Georgia Tech plays Georgia Tech plays Georgia every year. Florida State plays Florida. Clemson, South Carolina. And then also for those teams. So, this is where big non-conference games do not play well for the other conferences, but for these ACC teams, you may want to schedule a big-time opponent to get viewership up and therefore your revenue up. Revenue at the gate, if you get to play that game at home, but also the revenue through this model. Basketball will be about 25% of this. Football, about 75% of this. Man, do I want to get into the math on this? All right. We will end it right there. We had something to do. Had to be a positive outcome for Florida State. We're way better off than we were 14 months ago. This is going to make the conference better. I think it's going to incentivize people in the conference to really invest. Yeah. I just don't know if the numbers are available and the information on how to break down these numbers. I may do a rough shot at this to take on these numbers and see what this looks like. And especially since I don't know what the basketball numbers are, guess I could go through those as well. That would be 25% of the total. Interesting. All right, folks, we appreciate you being here. We've got an Iowa show that's coming up here in about 25 minutes, I believe. Yes, it's 5:06, 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central with our Iowa folks and Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Please join us there. You see that we do this every day, Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern time. Please join us here on the Voice of College Football. And we've got a recruiting and portal show coming up on Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Joe says, Mark, I'd call in if you had a phone line. I don't like staying in front of my laptop. I think better moving around. Yeah, I would like to get to a place where I reinstall the phone line. I'm doing this because I'm looking at the audio board that's sitting down here that costs like $1,000, but that is needed for the phone lines. Maybe someday we will get back to that. I am really just poring over these numbers in my head, trying to figure out if it's going to be worth trying to put this all together. Okay. Regardless, we're here talking college football with all of you. And we will continue our schedule series. Please check out those videos. We are almost done with the Big Ten. We'll get to the ACC and the other conferences, but we're doing a schedule breakdown. I'm going to do a breakdown of our coaches' rankings as well. Every offseason, we rank all the coaches. So basically what's coming up, unless I really tackle this ACC business, which I might. Beyond that, we're going to do coaches' rankings. We just don't do like a top 10. We rank all the power conference coaches, all 70. So be looking out for those. That'll be in the next week or so. And then the program rankings, people always enjoy that. We're going to rank all the programs in college football, all 135. And really, those are the next two big initiatives. Then we'll take on the all-time program rankings as we get into May and June. People love that as well. That's a fun time. We're going to carve through all the national championship seasons. Boy, we got a lot on our plate. We'll get to it. We didn't get to all of it last offseason, but hopefully we'll get to it this offseason. But I may pour over these ACC numbers and see what we can figure out. And so be looking out for a possible video on that, or maybe a live stream on that. Right, folks. Always appreciate everything that you do for us here at the Voice of College Football. Please hit the like button on your way out. We will talk Iowa football with you in about 20 minutes. We'll see you then.